Good morning. We are in the book of Jeremiah today, and today is day 30 of lockdown. Apologies for what may look a little bit school teachery. I've drawn a chart behind me which I'm going to refer to in a minute. And I've done that because actually the story of Jeremiah is set in a time of great political upheaval. And although we've covered this story before, when we covered the end of Kings, I thought little bits of it might bear repetition. In fact, I'm going to do that first. So I'm going to stand up and hopefully you'll be able to see the board even if you can't see me. Let me get a pen. So let me first of all show you this. This is the genealogy of the last 5 kings of Judah. So Josiah was a good king. Lots of reforms took place in his time. But you may remember that he ends up being killed in battle. He goes into battle with the Egyptians and he ends up being killed in battle. So he is succeeded, he should be succeeded by his son. Now all of these characters have 2 names each, and I've given you both their names because it gets a bit confusing otherwise. Well, it gets confusing anyway, but maybe a little bit less confusing when I give you both their names. So Josiah should have been succeeded by his son Jehoahaz, otherwise known as Shalom. But Jehoahaz is deported to Egypt pretty much in the same military action that killed his father. So he's out of the picture very quickly and he doesn't really reign for any substantial period of time. So the one who truly takes over after Josiah is Jehoiakim. Now I've given him a capital M at the end because his son has a capital N at the end. And they're so similar in the names that I just wanted to draw your attention to that to try and avoid another potential source of confusion. So Jehoiakim reigns in his father's place for a while. And Jehoiakim is living, as we're going to see in a moment, in a time when the nations of Egypt and Babylon are kind of battling it out, and Judah is caught between them. So his loyalties are continually being pulled in one direction or the other. And in the end, he is murdered by Babylon. And shortly after that, his son Jehoiakim is deported to Babylon. He's basically deposed by the Babylonians, probably because they thought he would, in vengeance for his father's murder, he would lead a rebellion, not without cause, because the whole time was time of great rebellion. So Jehoiakim, also known as Jeconiah, succeeds his father, but is taken into exile to Babylon. And Zedekiah, also known as Mattaniah, is then the last king of Judah. And he's going to be the one who is kind of on the throne as a puppet, really. But he's on the throne when Babylon finally extinguishes Jerusalem. So if I just show you remind you what happens to him. So Shalom is deported to Egypt. Jehoiakim is murdered, or killed one way or another anyway. Jehoiakim is deported to Babylon, and Zedekiah is deported to Babylon. And I forgot to tell you that Josiah was killed in battle. So it's not a very happy family history, really. But I wanted to give you that because we're going to encounter these names. And if you go away and read Jeremiah and want to look at it a bit more, you're going to see all these names and it does get rather confusing. So I thought I'd just put that there to show you. And if you want to, you can take a screenshot, and I'm going to wipe it off because I'm going to show you something else. Right, let me try and do a little bit of a timeline, which because it does get very confusing. And in fact, it's taken me quite a while of just kind of sorting this all out. I've taught on this before and thought about this quite a lot before, but actually getting the timeline clear in my own head has been quite a sort of a business this morning. So hopefully you can see a timeline here. This is not linear, as you can see, but these are the main events and the kings of Judah. So Manasseh, described as the worst king of Judah. He's succeeded briefly by his son Ammon, who's really no better, but just doesn't reign for very long. Then Josiah that we mentioned, and Josiah is where we begin this family tree that I showed you over here. Jehoiakim, and Zedekiah, the final one. They both come to the throne in the same year because Jehoiakim is deposed straight away. Now, let me show you where the ministry of Jeremiah comes in. So the ministry of Jeremiah begins in 627 here. So during the time of Josiah, and it finishes around 570, so after this event here, which is the fall of Babylon. So this is the ministry. This is the ministry of Jeremiah. So these are the periods that he is spanning. Now, let's just look at the superpowers who are threatening the place at the moment. So early on in the story, as you'll remember, Assyria is the great superpower. So if I kind of try and represent Assyria like this, then in 627, the king of Assyria, called Ashurbanipal, dies, and he is really the last strong king of Assyria. So after him, things start to weaken, and Assyria starts to weaken. It doesn't go away altogether, but it kind of tapers off a bit like this. I'm kind of representing it as tapering away like this in terms of its influence. Okay. Then let's have a different colour for Egypt. We have Egypt. Now, Egypt has been a significant force, but there's going to be a period when it is quite a strong force. So Egypt kind of begins like this and gradually gets bigger and bigger until about 605. And at 605, there's quite a decisive battle. And at this point, it has reached its peak, but then it is defeated by Babylon and becomes much less significant. Okay, so this is Egypt. And you can see, do you remember I said that Josiah was killed in a battle with Egypt? That's here in 609. So you can see this is when Egypt is at its peak and Assyria is already waning by then. And then the other superpower, what should we have for that? Let's have blue for that one, is Babylon. And Babylon is growing and growing, but this is going to be the moment when it reaches it comes into its full power. And its full power is going to continue beyond the end of our story. So this is where Babylon comes into its own, and it's been growing up until then. Right, now I hope that's helped, not confused. Because what I really want just to show you is that we're going to meet these three superpowers. We're going to see them in various conflicts with Judah. We're going to meet these various kings. The main take-home message is that this is a time of enormous political turmoil. And do you remember I said that Jehoiakim lived in a time when he wasn't quite sure if he should be giving his allegiance to Assyria or Egypt? And you can see that they're both quite powerful at this time, and little Judah is caught in the middle. Right, that's enough for that, but I will leave that behind me to try and go through. So that's kind of background to the story. Sorry. Okay. Now, so in this period then, as I've shown you, Jeremiah is active. And Jeremiah is sometimes known as the weeping prophet because most of his message is quite, it's not all negative at all, as we'll see, but a lot of it is negative, and he exercises quite a lot of lament and expresses quite a lot of grief, which is why he's known as the weeping prophet. Now, he demonstrates quite nicely for us two different ways in which the prophets acted, by prophetic action and by word. And I just thought I'd show you that in this book. So, chapter 32, we get an example of prophetic action. So this is the situation at the beginning of chapter 32. The army of the king of Babylon is besieging Jerusalem. And Jerusalem is shut up, obviously, as a nature of a siege, and Jeremiah is shut up within Jerusalem. He's been imprisoned. So imagine this, you've got this besieging army which has laid waste to the whole surroundings of Jerusalem, and is besieging the city, and Jeremiah is in prison in the city. And he gets a visitor while he's in prison. The reason he's in prison, by the way, is because the king doesn't like his message. Now, he gets a visitor in prison, and his visitor is his cousin Hanamel, something like that. And he comes to see him, and he says, Jeremiah, will you buy my field in Anathoth? Now, Anathoth is obviously a field, so it's outside the city. This is currently under the boot of the Babylonian army. we can just imagine what's happened to it. You know, if it was a vineyard, it's an olive grove, it's probably been completely trashed. It might be that the army's encamped on it. It might be they're using it as a latrine. I mean, who knows what they're doing with it, but this is not good real estate. And he comes to Jeremiah, possibly the most tactless prison visitor ever, and says, hey, do you want to buy a field? And here's Jeremiah's prophetic action. So you may remember we spoke about this in the book of Ruth, how it is the job of a close family member to buy family property if it's in danger of falling outside family hands, in order to keep property within the family. So Jeremiah has a kind of responsibility to do this, but nonetheless he's in prison in a besieged city, and the land in question, as I say, is under the boot of the enemy. But here's Jeremiah's prophetic action, and he chooses to buy the field. And he buys it for 17 shekels of silver, which is a derisory amount of money, which probably suggests it was all the money he had. But he takes it and he gets it witnessed, and he makes a deed of purchase. And he puts the deed of purchase away in an earthenware vessel, which may sound odd to us, but that's where they used to keep important documents, against the day when he or his descendants can claim his land. Now, this is a prophetic action, not an act of land acquisition for his own sake, really. Jeremiah, we've been told in chapter 16, is wifeless and childless. So he has no family to whom he can bequeath this deed of purchase. And the burden of his message is that this city is going to fall and Babylon is going to overrun the place. So what he's doing when he buys a field is he is making an investment in the future on the basis of his confidence in the promises of God for the future. So this action, which by nature of the fact that he's calling in witnesses and getting this deed drawn up, this is a public action. And this is an action which is expressing publicly confidence in the long-term faithfulness of God, despite the short-term difficulties that they are experiencing. So that is an example of prophetic action which Jeremiah performs. And I rather love that story because I think there was something deeply profound about it. The other type of prophecy which we get is spoken prophecy, which ends up as written prophecy. And just a couple of pages further on, we get a good example of this. This is in chapter 36. So this is the time of the king, of King Jehoiakim. And God gives Jeremiah a word for Jehoiakim. And Jeremiah calls a scribe and dictates this word to the scribe. The scribe's name is Baruch. So Jeremiah dictates this prophecy to Baruch. It's written down on a scroll. And Jeremiah says, I'm not allowed to go to the temple to proclaim this prophecy. I've been banned, presumably by the king. I've been banned from proclaiming this. So you are to take this message and you are to read it in the presence of the king. So Baruch takes this message, which Jeremiah has received from God, he's written down, and he takes this message to read to the king. And this is what happens. Verse 20, he goes to the court of the king and he starts to read it to him. And the king sits there, and it's winter, and he's got a brazier burning with some coals to keep him warm. He sits there and he listens to this word of prophecy, and every so often he interrupts Baruch, who is reading it, and he says, give it over here, give it here. And he takes the scroll and he gets a knife and he cuts off the bit that's just been read, and he hands the rest of it back to Baruch and he burns it. His own very, I'm not sure I'd call it a prophetic action, but action of resistance and objection. So this is what he does every so often, until the whole scroll has been burned up, and Baruch is crushed. He's dismayed, because this word of God, which has been given to him and given into his charge, has been completely destroyed by the king. And so he goes back to Jeremiah with his tail between his legs, telling him what happened. And he expects Jeremiah to be very upset or maybe very angry. And the word of the Lord comes to Jeremiah, verse 27. Take another scroll and write on it all the former words that were on the first scroll, and some extra ones as well. And so the prophecy is written again. So this gives us something about an insight into the construction of these prophecies and how they came to be in written form. But it also says something very profound about their understanding, which I share, that the word of the Lord endures forever and cannot be destroyed, even though the kings may rise and fall, they may try and resist or even obliterate the word of the Lord, but it cannot be destroyed. I think there's so much in this book that I'm now going to break the video and pick it up again with a second instalment of Jeremiah tomorrow. I'll see you then.